The air inside the Drakthun warship's tactical chamber was thick with tension and the sharp mineral scent of ozone. Lights pulsed rhythmically along the tall metallic walls, casting harsh blue reflections on the faces of the alien officers seated at the elevated circular table. Ava Morgan stood below them, the only human in the room, her posture upright, arms behind her back, eyes locked on the holomap that rotated slowly in the center of the chamber. Every instinct in her screamed that the formation being discussed was suicide. Yet she had kept silent for most of the briefing, watching and waiting, giving the general the chance to adjust, to reconsider, to correct what was obvious to her. General Kortal, massive and adorned in the red-edged battle robes of his caste, stepped forward and gestured toward the holomap. "The enemy's base lies here," he said, his voice rumbling like gravel beneath pressure. "We strike at dawn with twin phalanxes from the east and west. Their technology is outdated, their numbers inferior. The Drakthun need no further analysis." Ava's jaw clenched. She studied the ridge lines, the slope angles, the power signatures blinking just beneath the surface of the terrain. She saw the traps, not overt ones, but the kind only a human would think to set. Ava had served in 6 planetary conflicts. She had seen clever misdirection, feints designed to bleed armies dry. This reeked of it. The entire formation would funnel the Drakthun into a narrow valley with limited retreat access. The ridge was perfect for a pincer ambush, especially one hiding behind falsified heat signatures. "Permission to speak," Ava said, her voice level but firm. General Kortal turned his head slightly, as though annoyed that she had interrupted his monologue. "Speak," he growled, "but choose your words with caution, human." She stepped forward, gesturing toward the projected landscape. "With respect, sir, this is a textbook trap. The valley is too quiet. The signals along the ridge are inconsistent. Classic masking interference. If I were the enemy, I'd let us march in, then trigger explosives along both cliffs and rain down fire. It's not just an outdated base, it's bait." Murmurs echoed from the alien officers around the table. One of them, a pale blue Drakthun strategist, leaned in toward Kortal and whispered, but the general raised his hand to silence him. He stepped toward Ava, towering over her by 2 heads, his angular jaw twitching slightly. "You presume to lecture me on battlefield geometry?" he asked, voice lowering to a cold rasp. "You, who have no caste, no blood oath to this army, dare accuse your superiors of blindness?" Ava didn't flinch. "I'm not accusing anyone, I'm advising. That's what I was assigned to do. The data speaks for itself. The data is interpreted by warriors, not uninvited guests," he said. He turned his back on her and walked toward the console, then slammed a fist down on the command pad. The holomap collapsed. "Enough. You are relieved of advisory status, effective immediately. You will return to quarters and remain there until further notice." There was a moment of stunned silence. Ava didn't move. The chamber held its breath. Kortal turned again, eyes burning with authority. "Do you defy this order?" She met his gaze. "No, General, but I won't apologize for trying to save your soldiers." "Your tone is noted. Leave." She nodded once, turned, and walked out of the chamber in absolute silence, her boots echoing against the polished obsidian floor. The doors slid shut behind her. She made it halfway down the corridor before the adrenaline in her chest began to settle into something colder. Anger. Not fury, not vengeance, something clinical, a sharp edge of knowing. She had seen this before, not in the form of alien generals, but in bureaucrats, career officers, and arrogant commanders who mistook warning for insult. The pattern was always the same: dismiss the human, discard the outlier, and then, when things went to hell, scramble for answers. Ava entered her assigned quarters, a small metallic suite devoid of warmth or decor. She sat down at the narrow desk, activated her portable display, and pulled up the battlefield projections again. Her fingers danced across the interface, pulling up raw data. Power flickers, shadow patterns on the cliffside. She ran a thermal overlay and saw it again, the faint heat blooms behind the ridgeline, too evenly spaced to be natural. Whoever the enemy was, they had learned to hide well. She respected that, but it also meant that this wasn't some tribal remnant. It was coordinated, and it was going to kill a lot of soldiers. She tapped a few commands and downloaded the data onto a secure chip. Her rank might have been stripped in that chamber, but the soldiers out there wouldn't care about caste and protocol once the blood started flowing. What they would care about was who could keep them alive. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the blinking blue light of the chip. From her small window, she could see the troop carriers launching into the reddish dusk. A long line of them, armored, majestic, and doomed, roaring out toward the battlefield with mechanical precision. The silence in her quarters was total, broken only by the faint hum of the ventilation system and the growing weight in her chest. She had 1 hour, maybe less, before the enemy struck. Her mind was already working through fallback strategies, emergency communications, topography traps she could exploit. Stripped of authority, maybe, but not stripped of her mind. Not stripped of what she knew to be right. She stood up, clipped the data chip to her belt, and walked toward the locked weapons cabinet. Her clearance still worked. Apparently no one had remembered to revoke access yet. Or perhaps someone on the back end hadn't agreed with the general's decision. She grabbed her gear, slung her lightweight rifle over her back, and clipped a communication node to her wrist. The war had already started, and as always, protocol was the first casualty. Ava stood motionless in the dim light of her quarters, fully geared and ready. The silence in the corridor outside had an unnatural stillness, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. The troop carriers had already launched, leaving behind only the hum of auxiliary systems and a thin echo of machinery drifting through the walls. She touched the comlink on her wrist and switched frequencies manually, bypassing standard encryption to reach the outer perimeter drones still in orbit. She wasn't part of command anymore, but she didn't need permission to observe. Lines of data streamed across her portable display. The first assault formation had reached the edge of the Keshvar Ridge and was spreading outward according to Kortal's instructions. She traced their staggered advance on the thermal feed, each squad a red flame crawling across cold, gray terrain. On the surface, the approach seemed textbook, but she saw the delay markers creeping into the margins. Hesitations, repositioning, units struggling to maintain formation. Terrain reports came back slower than expected. Drones were disappearing into static. She zoomed in on a secondary ridge just northwest of the projected strike zone. The rock face was irregular, but shadows didn't move naturally. In the corner of the thermal view, 3 small red dots blinked out, vanishing at once. No alarms were raised. The system registered it as equipment failure. Her jaw tightened. She activated a deeper spectrum scan. Something was there, heat blooms too regular to be wildlife. Fixed signatures, embedded tech. Not high enough to trigger automatic warnings, but unmistakably artificial. Cloaked artillery, maybe, or plasma mines ready to triangulate once the army passed into the kill zone. She switched to the broader surveillance net, listening to the background comm chatter. Alien voices spoke in short bursts, all clipped and confident. General Kortal was already transmitting ceremonial orders. Ava recognized the ritual phrases, boasting, declarations of ancestral dominance, the usual theater before combat. It made her stomach turn. No one was watching for irregularities. No one was listening for silence. She turned to her weapons and adjusted the scope on her rifle, calibrating it for low-light readings. She didn't plan to fire a shot, but if things went the way she expected, she wouldn't stay idle either. She opened a side drawer and pulled out her field case. An old Earth-issued combat interface, outdated by Drak-Thuun standards but reliable. She attached it to her gauntlet, bypassed military restrictions, and booted a tactical overlay. 30 seconds later, she had full visual of the eastern flank. The squad stationed there, Squad Ravax, was already moving too fast. The unit leader, a junior officer named Threxen, was a rigid traditionalist known for prioritizing speed over caution. Ava watched as he ignored irregular motion detections near the cliff base. The same formations repeated on the western flank. The symmetry was too perfect. This was not an ambush prepared overnight. It had been waiting. She reached for her comm again. Officially, she had no clearance, but protocol mattered less than saving lives. She tuned into Squad Ravax's frequency. "Threxen," she said sharply, "slow your advance. There's seismic interference ahead, possible trap zone." There was silence for 2 seconds before the reply came, condescending and cold. "Human voice is unauthorized on this channel. Disengage immediately or face court sanction." Then die in prideful ignorance, she muttered, switching frequencies before he could reply. She moved to the emergency broadcast queue and opened an encrypted channel tied to orbital support. It was reserved for atmospheric intervention requests, but she used it as a back door to tap into the ridge's geological monitors. The readings were unstable. Shallow vibrations tickled the sensors. Some kind of underground charge system was pulsing just beneath the rock layer. If triggered, it would bury entire squads in seconds. Her heart pounded. She looked up at the small window again. From orbit, the battlefield looked like an unbroken stretch of red and gray, but she could already picture it, soldiers marching into a dead valley, surrounded by things their tech couldn't detect. She could not stop it now, but maybe she could limit the damage. She left her quarters with purpose, moving swiftly down the main service corridor. 2 guards at the far end glanced up but didn't question her. Her armor still carried a lieutenant's tags. In the chaos of battle deployment, no one updated visuals, or maybe someone left it that way on purpose. She took the lift to the signal deck, an auxiliary control center used for fleet navigation adjustments. It wasn't part of the War Council's jurisdiction. The technician on duty, a young Drakthun with soft green skin and twitching antennae, looked up as she entered. "You're not authorized," he began, but she held up her wrist and flashed the override glyph she had embedded an hour earlier. "Emergency field assessment," she said coolly. "General's orders." He paused, scanned her display, then nodded without argument and stepped aside. Ava accessed the console and patched into the emergency relay tower, then pulled up the field telemetry of the Western advance. One of the squads had stopped moving. She focused on their position. 2 seconds later, a static burst filled the screen. Then came the first flash. It was a deep red bloom, small, precise, but unmistakably artificial. The squad's icon vanished. Another signal burst, another detonation. The ridge to the left of Squad Theron exploded in a vertical plume of fire and smoke. Ava leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The enemy wasn't striking the center line. They were taking out the communications grid, isolating squads before they could alert command. She opened a direct comm to the orbital fleet. "This is Lieutenant Commander Ava Morgan," she said firmly. "I am requesting immediate lockdown of uplink channels Alpha through CETA. Enemy forces are using false telemetry to disorient troop formations. Multiple squads are down. Ridge is compromised." A gruff voice answered. "You are not command. This channel is reserved for override code 14 Gamma Delta. Validate my signature if you want, or sit up there and watch this army burn." There was a pause. Then the line crackled again. "Channel lockdown initiated." Ava wasted no time. She opened a sector-wide frequency, not encrypted, broadcasting to any unit that still had ears. "This is Ava Morgan. Do not proceed into the Keshvar Ridge. Repeat, retreat from current position and regroup at fallback coordinates. Use natural cover. Assume enemy ambush. Do not rely on command telemetry. Enemy artillery is cloaked. If you can hear this, fall back and survive." She repeated the message twice, then 3 times, each time knowing that not every signal would get through. The comms would degrade quickly, and not all officers would trust a human voice. But someone would hear, someone would act. That would be enough, for now. She watched the map as several units paused. A few turned slightly. One moved to higher ground. Another 2 disappeared in bursts of static. Ava stepped back from the console and exhaled, heart heavy with the knowledge that the worst was yet to come. The trap had been sprung. The ambush had begun. The proud formations of the Drakthun army were breaking like glass under artillery they hadn't even acknowledged. But she wasn't finished. She turned and left the signal deck. Time was running short. The army had marched toward disaster, and now someone had to walk into the flames and pull what remained of it back into the realm of the living. Ava sprinted down the corridor, her boots hammering the alloy floor, echoing between cold walls lit by dim, pulsing lights. Sirens hadn't sounded yet. The main command deck still operated under the illusion that the assault was proceeding according to plan. But the battlefield below was already on fire. She didn't need a broadcast to know that. She had seen enough real-time combat feeds to recognize the difference between silence and death. She burst into the armory's auxiliary locker and scanned for what she needed: terrain packs, portable signal relays, a portable flare drone, and a combat drone still in standby mode. She activated it with her wristband. The sphere lit up with a green pulse and hovered beside her head, awaiting command. She keyed in a simple subroutine: recon, relay, auto-avoid fire zones. It wouldn't last long, but long enough to help her scout the perimeter and pass data back to surviving squads. She locked her armor plates into position and secured a reinforced outer vest lined with kinetic dampeners. She attached the comms booster to her left shoulder and loaded 2 backup batteries onto her belt. Her last act before exiting was to grab a field medical kit, not for herself, but for whoever she found still breathing in the wreckage below. She reached the drop bay just as the final outbound shuttle lifted off, oblivious to the chaos unfolding in the valley. One technician noticed her, his face dark with confusion. "Lieutenant Commander, you're not assigned to—" "I'm overriding protocol. Lower bay door 6. But the general doesn't know what's happening." She didn't wait for an answer. She crossed to the manual lever and threw it down. A hiss of vacuum lock seals preceded the heavy clunk of mechanisms shifting. Door 6 groaned open to reveal the deep orange sky of Keshavar's upper atmosphere and the jagged horizon beyond. The valley below was no longer a field of promise, it was a crucible. She launched herself forward. The impact of the drop sent a shudder through her spine. Her descent thruster slowed just enough to keep her alive, and she landed hard on uneven ground, knees bent, momentum rolling her into a crouch behind a half-destroyed boulder. Her drone zipped out above her, scanning in concentric spirals. Flashes erupted in the distance, white flares from energy bursts, plumes of black smoke spiraling into the air, screams of metal and flesh colliding somewhere out of sight. She crawled forward and peeked past the edge of the rock. To the west, 2 squads had been pinned between collapsed ridges. The path had been rerouted by a detonated rockfall, leaving the survivors huddled behind twisted transport wreckage. She zoomed in with her scope. 6 soldiers crouched low, one clutching a bleeding leg, another slumped and likely unconscious. The rest were firing sporadically into the upper ridge, but their shots weren't reaching anything. Ava tapped her wrist. "Squad Eric's, this is Ava Morgan. Do not engage the ridge directly. Enemy position is elevated behind line-of-sight deflectors. Use your suppressors as distraction and prepare to relocate." "Commander Morgan?" one of them answered, voice filled with disbelief. "I'm not your commander," she said, "but I'm here. Now follow my lead." She marked coordinates for a blind spot, a crater line created by one of the enemy's own detonations. If they could cross 20 meters, they'd be shielded long enough to reposition and potentially flank the ridge. She loaded a flash charge into her drone and sent it sweeping wide left. It blinked red once before shooting up and over the ridge. 1 second later, the sky lit up with a violent burst of white-blue light. Ava counted down silently. 3, 2, 1. "Move now!" she ordered. The squad didn't hesitate. She watched them bolt from cover, dragging the wounded and carrying the limp soldier between them. Incoming fire cracked behind them but missed wide, thrown off by the flash burst. When the last one slid into the crater, she exhaled and tapped a confirmation ping. 1 unit saved. She moved again, ducking between ruined ridges and scorched rock. She followed the chaos, not the sounds, which were confusing and distorted, but the patterns. Dead signals, black zones in the comm grid. She had trained herself long ago to follow absence rather than presence. It was there she found the remains of Squad Ravaks. 3 bodies lay crumpled near a burned-out transport. 2 were partially buried by debris. 1 still clutched a weapon, pointed uselessly at the sky. Ava knelt and pressed her fingers to each neck. No pulse, no breath. She scanned the terrain and noticed a streak of blood leading behind a split in the rock. She moved slowly, rifle raised. A figure slumped against the wall, a Drakthun officer, breathing in wet, ragged gasps. His armor had melted around his shoulder, and half his leg was blackened from a plasma burst. His eyes fluttered open when he saw her. "You," he rasped. "I heard your voice." "I'm not command," she said gently, "but I'm real." He coughed once, then twice, blood trickling from the edge of his mouth. "You were right. Ridge was crawling. Couldn't see them. Sound was all around us." She pulled open the medkit and applied a coagulant patch to his torso, then injected a stabilizer. He winced, but didn't resist. She finished bandaging his shoulder and scanned the skies again. "More will come," he said weakly. We thought they were nothing. They're not. she said. "And neither are you." She activated his distress beacon and set it to ping orbital medevac. He would make it if they moved quickly. She stood and took one last look at the ruined ridge, then continued on foot, heading for the central kill zone. By the time she reached it, the scene was hell. Fires burned uncontrollably across half the valley. Bodies, Drakthun and enemy alike, littered the field in unnatural silence. The command transport had been ripped apart, the side of its hull folded open like paper. A squad of survivors clustered near the wreck, barely holding position as enemy drones zipped overhead. Ava didn't hesitate. She stepped into their line of fire and fired 2 precision rounds into the sky, taking down the closest drone. The others followed her lead immediately. It took 5 minutes of coordinated effort, but the air cleared. The squad leader approached her, panting. "You're human." "I noticed," she said dryly. "You're not command." "No," she said, "but I'm here. And you're alive." He hesitated, then nodded. "We'll follow your orders." She raised her wrist and activated a relay channel. One by one, more survivor signals lit up the grid. Ava linked them all and began issuing new formations, rally points, and fallback paths. General Kortal had lost control, but someone else had just taken the field. Ava stood at the center of the chaos, surrounded by burning metal and thick columns of smoke curling toward the dull orange sky. Her armor was smeared with soot, and the heat clung to her like a second skin. Yet her mind remained cool, sharply focused. Her wrist display blinked with incoming requests, frantic pings from isolated units, sensor data from her drone, fragmented audio clips from soldiers trying to regroup. The official command network had long since fallen silent. Orders from General Kortal had ceased. No rally points, no air support, no extraction requests, just noise, useless noise. She shut off the remnants of the primary frequency and patched her command mesh through a side relay she had hijacked from the auxiliary signal tower. It was basic, limited in range, but stable. She uploaded the latest terrain scan and assigned new squad numbers to the survivors who had answered her earlier broadcasts. She didn't need a formal army. She needed movement, cohesion, and trust. The first strike had gutted the central line. She marked what was left of the West Ridge as a fallback site and dispatched her drone to project holographic markers there, bright blue indicators that would only be visible through her spectrum filters. If anyone had the tech, they'd see a path. If not, they'd hear her voice. She raised her wrist again. "This is Morgan. If you're receiving this, you are now part of Falcon Network. Ignore rank and old call signs. You report to me now. I am establishing Phase Red Protocol. We are regrouping at Zone Delta 9. No one moves alone. Link with your nearest active signal and move in pairs." As soon as she released the transmission, markers began moving on her map, slowly, staggered, but moving. She jogged east toward a group of stranded engineers who had been using the remnants of a cargo carrier as cover. As she approached, one of them rose with a shaky weapon pointed her way. She didn't flinch. "Stand down. I'm not your enemy." The engineer, a younger Drakthun male with blackened fingers and a fractured faceplate, lowered his rifle slightly. "You're the human," he said, voice strained. You gave the order to retreat. You saved half my squad." "I'm here to save the other half," she said. "Can any of you move?" "We can walk," another replied. "The commander was hit. She's still breathing but not speaking." "Then you carry her," Ava said. "And follow the markers. I'm heading for the forward impact trench. Enemy artillery will reset any minute." One of the engineers paused. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything." Ava met his gaze. "Because I can. That's the difference between leaders and statues." He said nothing else, only nodded. As the squad formed up and began moving, Ava turned back to the battlefield. The trench was 200 meters away. She moved across open ground in bursts, always under cover, always using ruined terrain to mask her position. Her drone had detected scattered life signs there, none moving. She knew what she would find, bodies and broken shields, but she also knew that line was critical. If the enemy advanced past it, the remaining survivors wouldn't have time to retreat. She arrived at the lip of the trench just as another blast shook the far eastern slope. Shrapnel whipped across the horizon like glass rain. She dropped to her knees and crawled forward, peering down into the gully. 4 soldiers lay scattered, 3 alive but pinned. One had lost his weapon. Another held a plasma torch like a club, desperately scanning for targets. Ava slid down the slope, boots digging into the ash-laced dirt. One soldier turned sharply until he saw her armor. "You're not Drakthun, Command," he said weakly. "I'm not," she replied, crouching beside him. "But you're still alive. That means you're mine now." She attached a med patch to his leg and motioned to the others. "You, pick him up. You take point with me. We're pulling out north through the crater edge." The soldier with the torch looked at her for a moment longer before standing. "You're giving orders like you never stopped." "I didn't," she said. She led them out of the trench in staggered movement, using low bursts from her drone to distract enemy spotters. By the time they reached the rear ridge, her map lit up with new pings, 5 more squads converging on her signal, along with a long-range frequency bounce from orbit. A familiar voice crackled into her earpiece. "This is Fleet Operator Renix. You're broadcasting a command mesh not registered to current Drakthun formations. Identify." "This is Ava Morgan. You know who I am." A pause, then the voice lowered. "You're not authorized to lead this operation." "No one's leading this operation," she said. "That's the problem. I'm not asking. I'm reporting. Your troops are rallying around me because I haven't disappeared." Silence again. Then, "Understood. You have air support if you can mark a clear path." "I will," she said. "But I want all footage routed to orbital command." "Why?" "So that when this is over, no one pretends this didn't happen." She cut the channel. A moment later, her drone scanned the next section of ridge and pinged 3 heat blooms advancing fast. Enemy drones or foot soldiers, she didn't care. She dropped to one knee, aimed, and fired twice. One explosion burst in a scatter of molten shards. The other 2 changed direction. "Cowards!" she muttered. To her right, a new squad arrived, led by a grizzled soldier with a shattered pauldron and half his visor missing. He raised his hand in an old Earth salute, clumsy but sincere. "We're with you, Morgan." She nodded and pointed toward the rear ridge. "Set up an arc. You'll hold that line. No one passes." She walked past him, her legs aching, her hands trembling from fatigue, but her mind was as sharp as ever. Another ping flashed on her map, this one unexpected. It was a high-level signal, encrypted, bouncing from the orbital warship. She accessed it and saw the source, General Kortal's personal frequency. He was alive, but more importantly, he had started watching. She tapped the channel open. "General," she said, her voice calm. "You've missed quite the spectacle." No answer. She smiled faintly. "Don't worry, I'll send you the highlight reel." Then she shut it again and turned back toward the battlefield. She wasn't done yet. Ava moved through the valley like a phantom, her boots kicking up dust and ash while plumes of smoke drifted behind her. Around her, pockets of soldiers were no longer scattered but synchronized. Makeshift squads she had forged from ruin now moved with clear purpose, pressing into flanking arcs, reoccupying high ground, sealing gaps in the perimeter before the enemy could breach them. Her drone pulsed a steady rhythm overhead, scanning and relaying positional data, each ping painting a more stable map of the battlefield. The chaos had not ended, but it had been pulled into formation by the sheer force of her will. She had become what no one had dared call her, Commander. As she rounded a crater's edge, a wounded officer flagged her down, slumped against a shattered piece of armor plating with smoke rising from the remains of his gear. His left arm was limp, and a gash ran down the side of his jaw, but he still tried to stand at attention when she approached. "Stand down," she said softly. "You're not going to impress me by bleeding on your boots." He managed a painful smile. "General Kortal. He's alive. He's been watching. He sent a message across the officer band. No orders, just your name." Ava didn't react immediately. She simply handed him a med injector and crouched beside him. "What else did he say?" The officer looked dazed. "He didn't say anything else. He just repeated your name. Twice." She stood slowly. Her fingers brushed the edge of her rifle as if weighing the next step not tactically, but emotionally. She was tired, not just from exertion, but from years of being doubted, ignored, minimized. Her rank, her knowledge, her instincts, always framed as secondary, supplemental. And yet here she stood, the only voice on the ground keeping this army from collapsing into legend as a cautionary tale. A transmission flickered on her wristband, a high-priority signal this time not encrypted. "Lieutenant Commander Morgan!" came a voice that had once roared with absolute authority but now carried the low friction of humility. "This is Kortal." She didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch. He tried again. "You were right," he said. Still, she waited. "I see the ridge, the devastation. I see my men rallying around your signal. My command net is dark. Yours is lit." She exhaled through her nose and finally tapped the transmitter. "Are you calling to observe or are you calling to contribute?" His breath caught. "I am calling to surrender my command." Ava blinked. The noise of gunfire in the background dulled as the words settled over her like dust after an explosion. "I failed to see what you saw," he continued. "And because of that, too many have died. I do not have the skill to lead what is left. The army is yours, Commander. I am formally asking, no begging, that you take control." She looked up toward the sky, where somewhere far above the orbital ship floated in orbit, its glossy hull gleaming in the fading light. Her reflection in her visor showed ash streaks across her cheeks, cracked armor, and the flickering light of the drone still orbiting her like a metallic guardian. She looked like someone who had survived more than just a battle. "Your soldiers already chose," she said quietly. "I only followed through." "I humbly request," he repeated, slower this time, "that you lead the Drakthun forces as acting High Commander." A long pause hung between them, wrapped in fire, loss, and something heavier, respect that had come far too late. "Then get me my air support," she said. "Patch every pilot to my line. I'm leading the charge to the northern ridge. If we want to hold this valley, that's where the final push begins." "Yes, Commander Morgan." She closed the channel before he could say more. She pulled up the terrain feed and drew a red line along the top of the ridge, marking it as the new primary objective. The enemy had concentrated its strongest resistance there, knowing it was the only position that offered control of both retreat and reinforcement routes. If she could take it, everything south of the valley would fall back into Allied hands. She activated the open squad link and spoke with a tone that needed no volume, just precision. "This is Commander Ava Morgan. Phase Black is active. Full push toward Ridge 12. Squads Theta, Varan, and Vex will flank. All others press straight through the trench corridor. Artillery support inbound. Enemy resistance is expected to be maximum. I won't pretend this is safe. I'll only promise that I'll be right in front of you." She stepped onto the smoldering field and began running. The blast fields were alive with light as the first wave of energy projectiles sliced through the air, followed by the deep boom of ship-fired artillery pounding enemy fortifications. The ground quaked with every impact, but Ava didn't slow. Her rifle was up, firing in bursts. Her voice cut through the comms, directing units with clipped commands. She saw one squad pinned beneath a ridge alcove, and she launched a smoke flare to block line of sight. Another team hesitated at a collapsed pass, and she rerouted them through a narrow draw she had spotted earlier from high ground footage. By the time she reached the ridge, her armor was dented, her muscles screamed with exertion, and the sky behind her had turned the color of burnt copper. Her drone sparked once, then went dead, finally overwhelmed. She didn't mourn it. It had done its job. She pressed up against a jagged boulder, catching her breath. A voice crackled into her earpiece. "Commander, ridge control is 60% complete. Enemy forces are retreating. But there's one final bunker to the northeast. It's heavy fortified. They're digging in." "Then we dig them out," she said. She pulled the last of her high-impact rounds and loaded them into her underbarrel launcher. She moved fast now, no hesitation, no planning, pure instinct. Her team fell in behind her without question, ducking and weaving through gunfire as she led them toward the northeast cliff. The final stronghold loomed above them, carved into the mountain wall, a dark gash with muzzle flashes glowing from its slits. She didn't wait. She sprinted into open ground and fired 2 bursts directly at the center slit, then dove into cover just before return fire shredded the rock behind her. The blast echoed like thunder. As the smoke cleared, she saw the bunker's defenses sagging. "Now!" she shouted. Her squad surged forward, storming the stronghold in a coordinated wave. She rose last, followed them into the smoke, and vanished into the storm of light and steel. Minutes later, silence fell. The ridge was theirs. She emerged from the bunker's mouth, helmet off, eyes rimmed with sweat and soot. Her hair stuck to her face in strands, and her lips were cracked, but her gaze was steady. Behind her, soldiers cheered, not in triumph, but in sheer disbelief. Against every expectation, against every command, structure, and tradition, she had brought them through. A transmission lit her wrist one last time. "Commander!" Kortal said, his voice reverent now, smaller than it had ever been. "The Council will want to decorate you. The officers will want to debrief you. I suspect the galaxy itself may soon speak your name." Ava looked down at her blood-stained gloves and closed her eyes for a breath. "I didn't do it for them," she said. "I did it because no one else would." She cut the transmission and walked to the edge of the ridge. Below, the valley smoked with ruin, but the figures moving within it were alive. Many because of her. Not because of a rank, not because of legacy, but because, when the old way collapsed, someone stood up and said, "Follow me." And they did. That was enough.